Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alexis and today I'm going to be sharing some of my Galentine's Day picks. When I say that, considering Valentine's Day is coming up next week, I really wanted to share some recommendations that I feel display strong friendships or family sibling dynamics because, well, a little more appreciation for those bonds within books, because of course we want to acknowledge the romantic relationships, but I definitely want to also refer to platonic and friendly relationships within books. So with that being said, let's get into my recommendations. The first series I'd like to start off with is the Sinful Wallflowers trilogy by Stacy Reid. This follows a group of 3 friends who are self-proclaimed wallflowers because they aren't as sought after in high society and for marriage. So, yeah. The first book follows Catherine and Alexander. Catherine, aka Kitty to friends and family, decides to start a rumor that she is in fact betrothed to the recluse Duke, and that would be Alexander. After an injury, he had been recluse and isolated from high society, and this was self-isolation for sure because of probing eyes and curiosity. He just wanted to avoid the crowd. But upon hearing about the rumor, he decides to meet Kitty for himself and see what she's all about. But of course, when they finally meet, he decides to leave the rumor as is and pursue fake dating so that way they could avoid certain things that society expects of them. This builds a strong bond and it has disability representation in here. Definitely elements of Beauty and the Beast vibes in here. I really enjoyed it. This is my first Stacy Reid book and, you know, it's unforgettable. So definitely start out with this one. I will say I did read the entire series listening to audiobook, so I afterwards had to get a hold of physical copies and I have no regrets about this. The second book, Her Wicked Marquess, follows Marianne. She is one of the quieter girls of the bunch, and essentially her family was pushing her to marry an awful man, but instead she decides to take her life in her own hands and say that she is in fact betrothed to Nicholas. Nicholas, after hearing a rumor, he decides that it's okay to let this lie continue because he suspects that someone close to her is involved in dark history related to someone he loves. So yeah, this had mystery elements, blackmail elements, of course historical romance. I did enjoy this, perhaps not as much as my darling Duke, but with that being said, it's still an enjoyable read and they definitely build their friendship bond as well over the course of the lie that eventually blossoms into truth. So very beautiful story. The third and final book of the series is A Scoundrel of Her Own. This follows Ophelia, or Fifi, and Devlin. They initially met as children, and it is a class difference romance, friends to lovers romance for sure, forbidden romance. And essentially, Fifi was almost drowned, but Devlin saves her and they end up staying together alone as children, so nothing happens. They just get really close before they are found again and rescued. But he did save her and she never forgot him. He always intended to have her, but due to class differences, their families forbade it. And by theirs, I mean mostly on Fifi's end because she is considered to be upper class. But yes, years later, Devlin gets successful. They don't intentionally cross paths, but Fifi, upon hearing truth or secrets, I should say, surrounding her family and her ties, she decides to seek out the truth, and Devlin helps her on this as well. So, elements of family betrayal, deceiving. Yeah, I really enjoyed this because of the friends dynamic and the flashbacks definitely rooted their relationship as well for a strong bond. In the book, she is in fact more so a dark-haired or brunette or black-haired woman. In this, it is displaying her as a blonde because she does go in disguise. I don't agree with that, but it's still a beautiful cover, very enjoyable, and yeah. So all in all, if you enjoy historical romances that follow a group of girlfriends, definitely recommend this trilogy by Stacy Reid. The next series I'd like to share is the Destiny Trilogy by Beverly Jenkins. This follows three brothers in California and their love interests. The first one, Destiny's Embrace, follows Logan and Mariah. Mariah is a Philadelphian woman who wants to move out to California because she does not enjoy her life in Philadelphia because of her poor relationship with her mother. So she ends up taking a position as a housekeeper for Logan's ranch. He was not aware that his stepmother was hiring somebody, and I really appreciated their relationship. Surprisingly, they fell in love within a week, but the way it was written, it felt believable, and it's close proximity. They really got to know each other, and they're working the ranch together. He didn't expect her to be as strong-willed or as beautiful. This is, of course, African American romance. Beverly Jenkins really has this gift and this passion to write books about people of color in historical settings. This is one of my favorite series. This is the first book and great start to the series overall, but is it my favorite? We will see. The second book, Destiny Surrender, follows Andrew or Drew and Billy. Billy is a lady of the night that Drew tends to frequently visit and take care of, but it does start off with their last steamy night before they are separated for a long period of time. But after that last encounter, Billy does end up getting pregnant, and they do end up running into each other again during her pregnancy, but she decides to keep it from Drew because she doesn't feel like she will fit into his lifestyle, and vice versa, because he is an established lawyer of a man and she is still a lady of the night, still working for her employer as long as she can. But when months later, after giving birth, she learns that she could potentially be separated from their child, she decides to seek Drew out again for protection and finally confess that she does in fact have his child. This was definitely a story of passion. It is somewhat a hate to love because Drew was very upset with Billy for first not telling him about the pregnancy, and second because she does end up disrupting an engagement that he has with someone else. But either way, this book I really enjoyed. It is perhaps my favorite in the trilogy because of the romantic suspense aspect. Billy, because of the protection she needs under Drew. There is, of course, someone coming after her. There's the suspenseful aspect, and there is also a sense of, I guess, magical element, but not too serious. You'll understand if you read the book what I'm referring to, but you certainly should. And if you have already, you'll know that this is definitely worth it. I just love this story, and I definitely see myself revisiting it sometime soon. The third and final book of the Destiny's trilogy is Destiny's Captive. This follows Noah and Pilar. Noah, being the younger brother of Drew and Logan, is essentially the most separated from the siblings because of his experiences. He was shanghaied, meaning he was kidnapped and forced to work on a ship until he escaped years later and is finally able to return home. Pilar, being descended from pirates, is also very strong-willed, and this follows their romance. It is somewhat a marriage of convenience because Pilar is trying to escape from certain circumstances that she put herself in order to get justice. However, because it's a pirate romance, I'm not too crazy about them, but I really enjoyed this. And there is a really enjoyable swordplay scene in here as well that has still never left my mind after first reading it. And I did read all three of these physically for the first time. So yeah, great series. I'd also like to share that although these three books follow one of the brothers, there's also an underlining subplot that follows Alonza. She is the stepmother of Logan and the birth mother of Drew and Noah. She does have her love interest mentioned as well, and it's just threaded so nicely throughout the series, definitely enjoyable and definitely satisfying. So you're not only getting a main romance within each of these, but you're also getting a really enjoyable subplot romance throughout. So highly recommend. The next series I have here is the Wallflowers series by Lisa Kleypas. Now, these are the main 4 books of the Wallflower series. Each book follows a friend. They are wallflowers in their society because of various reasons. It could be because of their financial status. It could be because of their cultural status, if they're American or not. But I'll also explain that as I get into each of these books. The first book, Secrets of a Summer Night, follows Annabelle and Simon. I do have the lovely step back edition. Step backs refer to the first page that is short, and then it usually includes a cinch cover. But this follows Annabelle and Simon. This is a class difference romance. It is mutual pining, I would say, but essentially Annabelle intends to marry for the benefit of her family, so that way they can be more financially stable and gain or maintain status in the upper class. Following the death of her father, her mother does try to use alternative means to make ends meet, and all the more reason Annabelle pressures herself to marry for better. Whereas Mr. Simon Hunt, a man who is not of the peerage, is a very self-made man. He is still considered an outcast among the peerage because, again, he does not have a title, but because he is a self-made man and he's building industry, a booming industry, he does end up finding his way into that crowd and does end up having his own friendships as well with some of the male main characters in the future books. So I really enjoyed this because it does introduce us to the other 3 wallflowers in the group, also the friends of Annabelle. They do make a pact in here to help each other get married and find husbands so that they can continue to survive, because of course as women back then and in England, they didn't really have much of a say in their futures outside of marriage or outside of relationships within that, if they are of the upper class. But yes, I really enjoyed this one. Great start to the series. The second book, It Happened One Autumn, is actually my favorite in the series, and this follows Marcus and Lillian. Lillian and her younger sister Daisy are actually Americans who came to England because, well, they weren't finding any husbands in America, despite the fact that their father was running a booming industry as well. And it is hinted already in the first book that Marcus and Lillian kind of have this hateful attraction toward each other. But in this one, it really blossoms. And I guess that's why I'm so attached to this one. And also, I would say Lillian is rather rambunctious compared to the other wallflowers. And also, she is great sister not only to Daisy, but she has a very strong relationship with the other 2 wallflowers, which I will get into in a moment. This is just a really telling story, and I don't know what else to say outside of that, but long story short, they try to resist each other, but can't help it, and I just love it. I love it, love it, love it. The third book, Devil in Winter, follows Sebastian and Evie. This is their lovely step back. I will say that Evie, or Evangeline, is the quietest of the wallflowers, but that does not mean she's weak, and she definitely proves it in here. Her family is sort of pushing her into the arms of someone that she just doesn't want to marry, and her family is quite despicable. Whereas Sebastian, she ends up running to him because he is the known rake in their society, but she does seek him out because she thinks that they could essentially be beneficial to each other. Sebastian does recognize that even though Evie does stutter and Evie does have flaming red hair and she's not the standard of beauty at the time, he does find her beautiful and intriguing. So although this is actually my least favorite in the series, I know I'm in the minority in that. This tends to be a lot of people's favorites, and I've noticed that it even has the most ratings and reviews on Goodreads, so seems people just jump to this one, but I highly recommend the rest of the series as well. Because of events in It Happened One Autumn, I just had a grudge against Sebastian, but like I said, I really enjoy Evie, so really I don't have a lot of complaints about this. It was really just all on Sebastian and his former actions, but he does get better in here. Stunning story. Again, friendships just continue to get stronger, and as implied by the titles, it's just going season to season to season, so highly recommend. And the last of the Wallflowers is Scandal in Spring with Daisy and Matthew. It does include this lovely step back. As I said earlier, Daisy is the younger sister of Lillian, and she is also the youngest of the 4 Wallflowers. This is her love story with Matthew. Matthew was also an American. He did work for her father, and her father did favor him, whereas Daisy, she wasn't really a favorite by her father. For one, she was a woman, and he didn't see as much of a benefit with her as compared to his son or the male species in general. It does acknowledge that Daisy and Matthew knew each other back in America. There is some identity situation here as well. But although they did know each other in America, this does take place years after their first encounter. And when they did have their first impressions, Daisy was not at all interested in Matthew, but it isn't until he returns and he comes back. It's just a blossoming romance on her end, whereas he always had interest in her, and I thought that was really fun to include in here. There's also an element of wishing well and hopes. Of course, we get to see the other pairings of the series that we got to enjoy before, so this is a very nice conclusion to the series. However, I will be sharing the extended novella and the prequel to the series as well. Now, the prequel to the series, again, The Magic. This follows Aline and McKenna. Aline is, in fact, one of these sisters to Marcus, and essentially their father was a very demanding man. He expected her to marry into upper class society. He was a very cruel man, but she ends up falling in love with McKenna, who is one of the stable hands on her family's land. This is their love story. They did fall in love when they were really young, around the age of 17, I believe. It is, of course, forbidden romance because of class difference, and as always, it tends to be the parental figure who objects to it. Because of that, her father does end up making threats toward McKenna, but tells it to Aline, and Aline, in order to protect McKenna, does end up lying to him in order to convince him to leave. But when he finally returns, a self-made man, he is determined to get revenge toward Aline for breaking his heart, but he is not aware that she had loved him all this time, and of course he can't really live it down with his revenge plot because he is still in love with her, and that is why he is so hurt. But this is definitely a swoon-worthy romance. I will say it's not my favorite by Lisa Kleypas, but I can see why it would be. It's just, for me, I like a little more angst, whereas this one is definitely rather light, but I will admit there are some scenes in here that live rent-free in my head, such as something involving a tree. And when McKenna finally finds out the real reason why she continues to push him away, even after he learns what had happened. But yeah, this one, again, stunning step back. But yeah, definitely happy to have this in my collection. The last book in the series is A Wallflower Christmas, and this follows Rafe. Rafe is the brother of Daisy and Lillian from the main 4 Wallflowers, and he essentially comes to England in order to marry. He does not intend to fall in love. He intends to do it for convenience, and he does show interest in somebody. However, when he does intend to marry one person, he ends up falling in love with her chaperone. So it's somewhat class difference romance, but it's not a major plot point in here. And we do get to see the other couples also enjoying their Christmases with their families. So very enjoyable. I do wish I had the step back edition, but alas, I just have the regular mass market paperback. I do intend to eventually get my hands on the one with the step back, but for now, this will do. The last historical romance series I have to share today is the Victorian Rebel series by Kerrigan Byrne. I decided to include all of these because, in my opinion, these male main characters in each of these books does have a connection, whether it be by parental relationships or by their upbringing, and they do share dark history, whether that be imprisonment or an abusive parent. This, in my opinion, is kind of a staple historical romance because, for the most part, I notice that historical romances tend to be on the fluffier side and not really tackling into darker themes or more suspenseful themes. Whereas this one, Kerrigan Byrne is not afraid to get into it. I'll also like to preface that although I have all of the books here, I am not finished reading the series. I do have to read the last one and the third to last one still, but everything else I've read, why I read it out of order, I'll explain that as well. But yeah, let's get into these books. The first in the series, The Highwayman, follows Dorian and Farah. They initially met as children in the orphanage. Farah is of the upper class, whereas Dorian is not, so class difference in here. This is kind of a second chance because although they were together as children, they are separated because of something that Dorian does in order to protect Farah. So he is taken away, and then she is led to believe that he in fact died. So she assumes the identity of being his widow, although they never actually were married. She was committed to him. Years later, Dorian returns and decides to kidnap her in order to protect her from someone else who is after her and her money, who is a dangerous man. So Dorian is her protector in here. Second chance. There's element of false identity as well, and we do get hinted at some of the other male main characters in the series, but I'll get into them in a moment. The second book, The Hunter, follows Christopher and Millie. Christopher did witness the murder of someone he loved when he was younger, and after that he does take it upon himself to seek out revenge against those murderers, and he, of course, becomes a murderer himself. He is hired to be an assassin, and one of his targets end up being Millie. Millie is a performer, and she is also a parental figure to someone, so I enjoyed the children aspect or child aspect in here. There's a mystery surrounding her, why he was even hired to kill her. Although I was able to predict it, I am still not mad at this book. I really enjoyed it. Seeing Christopher finally open up to somebody after being alone for so long, or at least feeling so alone for so long, and Millie having a soft spot for him and her damaged hero. Yeah, this one, if you enjoy an assassin's romance, if you enjoy having children in your romances, definitely enjoyable. So the third book, The Highlander, is so far my favorite of the series. This follows Liam and Philomena. Philomena does go by Mina in this. She was in an asylum because of her husband. Her husband was a cruel man. He was quite abusive toward her, and because she did not conceive, he does end up putting her in asylum. He just does not care to keep her around. But she is rescued by other Victorian rebels. But she is sent away for her protection to be the governess of Liam's children. Liam does have two somewhat grown children. They're, I would assume, around teenage age, based on how they're described in here. And she is hired to be the governess for his children. She is a plus size heroine in here, very tall, very curvaceous. Liam, has no complaints about that. And he is a little bit older than Mina. There is age gap romance in here. I favor this because Mina does have some hesitation when it comes to intimate experiences, and Liam is so patient with her. He knows and recognizes the signs that she was in an abusive relationship, although she does keep her past secret for a majority of the time. Liam does not hold that against her in the long run. I'm also noticing a pattern with my selections. They tend to be favored if they involve children in some way, or if the heroine is curvy and just not the standard of beauty at the time. So I really enjoyed this in here, and Liam being an older man taking care of his Mina is just really enjoyed this. Of course, dark themes do continue in this as well, and it is mentioned, but every book in the series does kind of do that in the same depth. So this is giving off the same vibe as the rest of the series for sure. The next book, The Duke, follows Imogen and Cole. Cole, as implied by the title, does become a duke following the death of his family, and when he first learns that, he is in a gentleman's club when Imogen is there serving him, and they do have an attraction. He does end up having her for the night, and this ends up being her first time as well. A year or so later, he is brought back, but after being captured, and he doesn't seem to remember her. Their first encounter after his injury doesn't go well. She ends up having to leave her place of work, and she does end up getting harassed that night as well. She does enter a marriage of convenience with someone else, and then more time passes. She is now a widow, and they end up becoming neighbors. There does end up being a serial killer in here, and looks like Imogen ends up being his next target. So, in that being said, Cole does end up taking it upon himself to try to be there for her, and it was just an enjoyable read as well. So if you enjoy amnesia like romances, if you enjoy suspenseful aspects, again, this is another stellar read. So yeah, next is The Scot Beds His Wife. This is between Gavin and Sam. Essentially, Gavin is the brother of Liam from the Highlander, and he actually does not make great first impressions for me, but this was still a decent story. Gavin is trying to convince who he assumes to be Allison to sell her land to him, whereas Sam, assuming the identity of Allison following the unfortunate events surrounding her true identity, she does end up returning, and Gavin is of course attracted to her. She's a Spitfire. I will say this is not one of my favorites in the series, but I can see why someone might enjoy it. This does of course revolve around the themes of false identity again, and Gavin does end up learning who she truly is. They end up together happily. What more can I say? It's between an American and a Scotsman. They fall in love. Such is the way of a historical romance. Now on to the book that I did not read yet for the series, and that would be The Duke with the Dragon Tattoo. This is supposed to be the love between a man known as the Rook and Lorelei. Lorelei ended up nursing the Rook back to health, but when he was younger, the Rook did end up waking up in the gutter with no memory of who he was before then, and with this mysterious dragon tattoo. I assume he will eventually figure out who he truly is, and in the process does fall in love with the woman who helps him, and that would be Lorelei. Darkness, phantom aspects, catchy title. I mean, I'll eventually get to this. How soon, I don't know, but I have no doubt that this will be just as suspenseful and romantic as the rest of the series. After that, I have Seducing a Stranger. This is technically book 1 of the Good Girl series. However, if we're looking at just the Victorian Rebel series, it is also considered, I believe, book 7. It was originally titled A Dark and Stormy Night. I hope to eventually find this cover because I definitely prefer it, and it'll just match the rest of the Victorian Rebel series, whereas this one matches the Good Girl series. but this follows Carlton and his love with Prim. So essentially, Carlton is someone in law enforcement and he's on a case trying to solve the crimes that have been going on recently and the murders that have been going on. So he goes to this paradise, if you will, where people, and by people I mean women, end up meeting men in the night for encounters. So quite literally, Prim falls into Carlton's lap and they have a one night stand. Months later, he is at her wedding because the groom was murdered. And he suspects her, but he eventually learns that she is in fact pregnant with his child. So he takes care of her, and finding out the truth about who the true murderer is and how close he came to losing Prim. It's just a really great story. This is in fact the first book I read by Kerrigan Byrne. I am already into the Good Girl series as well. I believe I just have to read the most recent release, Crying Wolf, but I'm almost done that series, and when I am all caught up, I will probably make its own separate video talking about it. But yes, this is one of my favorites by Kerrigan Byrne, and also because it is my first read by her, I am just attached. So definitely recommend this one. If you aren't too sure about Kerrigan Byrne's writing, this is a good place to start because, again, it is considered the first book in another series, but it is connected to the Victorian Rebel series, so it's not like you're completely out of the loop. Each book can be read as a standalone. The last book of the Victorian Rebel series is The Earl on the Train. This is supposed to be about Sebastian and Veronica. So Sebastian is a pirate who's committed a lot of crimes, but he ends up inheriting the earldom, and one of the things he decides to do is to kidnap Veronica again because she's always been the woman who had his heart, especially after the first kidnapping. So this is already giving pirate romance. It is a small book, but the words are pretty small. So yeah, I will eventually get to this. I do end up reading books in order, so how soon I get to this one, not sure, but again, definitely a worthy series. Long story short, if you decide to pick up historical romances and you want a darker theme, definitely go into Kerrigan Byrne's Victorian Rebel series as well as the Good Girls series. But this one, the male main characters, as I mentioned before, are connected because of their parental ties and slash or dark history. So definitely worth the read. The first contemporary romance I want to share is Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. This is the first book in her latest traditionally published series. The second and third book will come out in future years. The second one, I believe, is due to come out in 2024. But I do want to take a moment to appreciate the stunning cover again. If you saw that I did a full video talking about that, feel free to check it out. My experience reading it for the first time, and it is quite tabbed. So yeah, I was able to get a hold of this edition. It is signed, and it included this lovely commissioned artwork along with a bookmark. I chose to recommend this book because not only is it a sweeping love story, but it, to me, falls within the themes of this video, and that would be following groups of friends or siblings that are really close and enjoying their love lives. So this is about Josiah and Yasmin. They are in fact divorced and co-parenting well. The reason why they got divorced in the first place is not because they fell out of love, but because of grief and loss. Definitely check triggers if you have that, but I, for one, wanted to go into this blind because I knew Kennedy Ryan would first off break my heart before mending it again. And this did not fall short in any way. I really enjoyed this because we got to not only see Josiah and Yasmin coming to terms with the fact that they still are in love with each other and finding their way back to each other despite all that they have lost, but Yasmin does have this great friendship with two other women, and each of them have their own lifestyle choices and decisions. So in this case, Yasmin is co-parenting with her love, and although they are not together by marriage, they are always together because of their children, and they also share a business together. Whereas the next female main character in the series will be about one of her friends who is in a marriage, but it's unclear yet if that will be about a second chance or if it will be the female main character getting a divorce and ending up with someone else. And then the third book will follow someone who is not a mother but is kind of giving auntie vibes to Yasmin's kids as well as the other female main character. This is an excellent start to the series. If you want a book that is not only giving you a second chance, but it's also giving people who are well established into their lives, they are what I presume to be in their early 40s by the time they get back together. They've already experienced love and loss and heartache together, and that is why they separated, but they do come back together. I also want to mention that Josiah does end up having his own experience as a Black man with mental health and trying to mourn and grieve in a way that is healthy for him. The part of the reason that they even divorced in the first place was because Yasmin was not feeling mentally healthy, and she does end up going to therapy. So there's mental health representation in here, there's Black love in here, there are children in here. One of them's a little too fresh for me, but I still enjoyed it, and just having them come together as a family, just great book. And if you've never read Kennedy Ryan before, this is definitely worth picking up, as is every book in her backlist. But I could just be biased because she's definitely one of my favorite contemporary romance authors, and she does do a lot of research, and she does include a lot of representation in her books. So if you're all for that, definitely support her. The next series I have to share is the Brown Sisters Trilogy by Talia Hibbert. Each book follows one of the Brown sisters and their love interests. They all have various personalities, various tropes in here. I would say that these are very much rom-com vibes, and they are very lighthearted, wholesome, great intro for people who are trying out romance for the first time but know they really enjoy rom-com movies or chick flicks. I really enjoy the series, and I do think each book got better and better for the 3 books. The first one, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, follows Chloe and her love story with Redford, aka Red. So essentially, Chloe, who has chronic illness and is very careful in her life choices, she is well educated, comes from a very good family. She experiences a near-death situation, and because of that, she decides to create her list of things she wants to do, a bucket list, if you will. One of the things is to become more intimate, and she enlists the help of Red, who is happy to assist. He is a redheaded, tattooed artist who is very handy, and he is very caregiving as well toward Chloe, but he is not aware of her background and her financial situation. He does have his own reasons, though, because of previous experiences with people similar to her background financially. This was my first Talia Hibbert book as well. As I said, they get better and better. And who knows, maybe this will be your favorite because of the things that I mentioned. But yeah, all in all, this book, very great start to the series. The second book, Take a Hint, Dani Brown, follows Dani and her love story with Zafir. Dani is a PhD professor for school, and Zafir is the bodyguard, or I should say security guard, in her building. They do have an attraction there, but during a fire drill, Dani does end up getting trapped in an elevator, and Zafir is there to help her. He even carries her out. They end up being captured on video on smartphones, as is, and they go viral online. So they start fake dating, And this ends up working out, of course, for them. They start to have a real relationship, although the attraction was always there. They had somewhat of a friendship beforehand because they would see each other pretty frequently. I love the fact that Zephyr is a romance reader himself, and then Danny, she is a bold, bisexual, beautiful woman, and we do get to see the other Brown sisters in here as well. I enjoyed the family aspect in here. This is another great book in the series. The last one in the series, Act Your Age. Eve Brown follows Eve. She's the youngest of the three. This is her love story with Jacob. It is my favorite in the series, partially because I felt like I could really relate to Eve in terms of not always feeling like you are meeting your family's expectations, but then wanting to prove yourself not only to them but to yourself, and not being too sure about where you want to go in life. She was pretty indecisive about her career choices, and they didn't always turn out the way that her family had wanted. Even though she was pretty good at a bunch of things, she didn't really have a passion for them, so she just couldn't find her will to pursue them. And on a trip to just venture off on her own, she does end up in a cabin that Jacob owns and runs. He is supposed to be hosting interviews for a new cook for his bed and breakfast facility, but he did not expect Eve to come in with her purple hair and messy outfit. Like, she was not prepared visually for an interview, but personality wise, she really brought herself to the table. His friend ends up saying that, hey, you should just go ahead and hire her and see how it turns out. He is very much a grump. Eve is more of the sunshine in their relationship. There are some tastefully done intimate scenes in this as well. All of them do have a little sprinkle of intimacy, but this one takes the cake, in my opinion. There is also some autism representation in here. Jacob does fall on the spectrum, and then later we learn Eve does as well. But yeah, this book I really enjoyed, and again, it's an interracial romance, contemporary romance, my favorite in the series, and you need to check this out. If you're going to read any of them, this is my favorite. Of course, I have to mention the Twisted Men from the Twisted series by Anna Huang. I wanted to mention this because each of the female main characters is one of 4 girlfriends and their love stories. This is definitely more of romantic suspense situation for the books, and they do get thicker as you go throughout the series. In my opinion, the first one's okay, but the rest of them are just stellar reads. I enjoyed these immensely, and I do have a separate video talking about my thoughts more fleshed out in another clip, so feel free to check that out. I'll link it in the cards above. The first book, Twisted Love, follows the love story between Alex and Ava. Ava is the sister of Alex's best friend, Josh. Josh does get a book. I'll get into his in a moment. But Alex essentially had an unfortunate past. He lost his family, and he is pretty much out for revenge against someone who is close to Ava's family. Part of that is him essentially taking care of her or looking after her because his best friend Josh asked him to do so. This is more close proximity, of course, brother's best friend trope situation in here. This was my first read by Anna Huang. It is not my favorite in the series, but I do think it's a decent start. The later books are more intriguing to me, and they can be read as standalones, although they are connected. So you might as well start at the beginning so you get to see how they are. I feel like Alex definitely was a character who you grew to love more in later books as well. Ava was always lovable, and this is definitely a grumpy sunshine trope. Ava is the sunshine character, and Alex is the more cold-hearted, grumpy male main character. So yeah, this is an intriguing start to the series, but as I said, they get better as you continue. The next book, Twisted Games, follows the love story between Bridget and Reese. Bridget is in line for the throne after her brother decides to step down from the line of royalty, and Reese is hired to be her new bodyguard. So this is a bodyguard romance. This is a royalty romance. This is somewhat forbidden because of their professions, and it is expected for Bridget to maintain a certain expectation within royal society. But yeah, this is an age gap romance as well. Very enjoyable. There are quite a few steamy scenes that are often referred to on social media. I do often hear this compared to Princess Diaries 2, which I agree with Chris Pine and Anne Hathaway. Also an excellent movie. Of course, it's PG, it's Disney, but this is more so if we saw something between bodyguard and royalty. So this one, very great. Certainly better than Twisted Love, but it is not my favorite. And we'll get into my favorite right now. Now, for my favorite pair, that would be Josh and Jules. Jules is one of the best friends of Ava. She is described to be the equivalent of Jessica Rabbit, if you are familiar with Looney Tunes characters. Very curvaceous, red hair, luscious lips, all that jazz. And Josh is the elder brother of Ava from the first book. So again, this is sister's best friend. And this is a hate to love as implied by the title. They've always kind of had an attraction to each other, but it's more so a hateful situation because something had happened years ago and they never really talked about it or talked it out. So they just maintained this certain level of hate or grudge against each other. Josh is a doctor and Jules is pursuing law. They do have some overlap in terms of workplace. This is a hate to love situation. They end up becoming enemies with benefits because, again, they have the strong dislike for each other, but they know that they are attracted physically to each other. So they do start that dynamic. It is proposed by Josh to continue to do so. There are definitely a handful of situations in here that I really enjoyed. As you can see, I tabbed this baby quite a lot. This is my favorite in the series. It's the second thickest book, and this is my favorite male main character from the series. Jules is my favorite best friend of the series because of her outgoingness, and they definitely share a dynamic that I am noticing to be a pattern. I tend to really gravitate toward the best friend books that end up being rambunctious characters or really outgoing characters with somewhat of a secret past because of things going on. There is an element of suspense in here as well as all the other books in the series. But yeah, Josh is my favorite. If you want to hear more about more in-depth situations going on here, check out the full video about the series. The last book in the Twisted series is Twisted Lies. This follows Christian and Stella. Stella is more so a quiet girl compared to the other female main characters. However, she is an online influencer. She is all about the vlogging and beauty lifestyle element. She is aspiring to get sponsorship deals as well. And Christian is, in fact, the man who owns the building that she decides to move into with Jules, as we saw from previous books. So she was a roomie with Stella. Stella and Christian did kind of always have an attraction, but again, Stella has the shy nature and Christian's always kind of looking out for her. He even dropped the girl's rent. But something happens and Stella ends up having a stalker. Christian has her move in so they can be close proximity and, you know, he can be her safe place. So I really enjoyed this. Although it is a thick book and I did enjoy it, it is not my favorite because it is more so a slow burn. They don't get together until maybe 80% of the book, despite the fact that they were really involved throughout. They do have some elements of fake dating in here as well. This is an excellent conclusion to the series. Now, the last series I just have to talk about in here is the Windy City series by Liz Tomforde. Each book follows the romance between a pro athlete and their love interest. I have to say that this is just quickly becoming my favorite author, and her books are phenomenal. I've only read 2 of the 4 that are currently published, but I'm definitely trying to go back into the other 2 books, and I'm already looking forward toward book 3 of the series that has yet to be released. I'll get into further detail later on, but the first book, Mile High, follows the love story between Xander's and Stevie. Stevie is the flight attendant, or one of the flight attendants for Xander's hockey team, and they have to see each other pretty regularly throughout the hockey season. Stevie is described to be a biracial, curvy heroine who is both confident and self-conscious, which I have to admit, I feel like everyone is at some point. But Xander's was always supportive. According to the news media, he was kind of a playboy, bad boy personality, but in reality, he just wanted to be able to grow and finally settle. But this follows his romance with Stevie. At first, it was supposed to just be one night only, but of course, it evolves from there. It's forbidden romance because it's still employer-employee. They have to maintain the secret also to protect Stevie from the media, but of course, things eventually escalate and it moves on from there. But I love this book. There's also mention of Xander's being very mentally aware in terms of therapy because of his own past, and Stevie is also starting to get into that. So there's a little bit of mental health representation in here. I love the fact that there is even a playlist. I have to say the playlist is just phenomenal. The author and whoever assisted her with that playlist, I love it because it's been on repeat. It's been on replay for me on Spotify. Definitely going to link it in the description box down below. But with that being said, this is an amazing sports romance, and just in general, the banter and the humor in it, the relationships with even the side characters that we're already anticipating for future books. I'm very excited. So with that being said, the next book, The Right Move, is following Ryan and Indy. Indy is another flight attendant and best friends with Stevie, whereas Ryan is a pro basketball player and the twin brother of Stevie. So there's the sense of best friend's brother trope in here. There's also close proximity. They are roommates because in Mile High, we do end up witnessing what happens to Indy, and for reasons that you just have to read about, she ends up having to move out and find a place to live, and the person she ends up staying with is Ryan. Ryan is very much isolated. He doesn't really make an effort to socialize as much due, again, to reasons that had happened in the past, trust issues. We do get to see the various types of love languages he uses. Indy is very nurturing, and as is Ryan, but he also can be very protective, and they are just so compatible, and their relationship is very palpable. I love the representation of ASL as well. Neither of the main characters are deaf, however, one of their close relations is, and then the other person ends up learning sign language for reasons that you just have to read, and it was just so adorable. And the fact that the author is even acknowledging that as representation. There's also mention of other backgrounds as well for other side characters. We do get to see book 3's male main character hinted at along with another person. So yeah, I really enjoy this series. This book did just come out on February the 7th, and of course I had to binge read it. I already watched another video that was from Caitlin from the Love Librarian. She did interview Liz Tomforde, and they did talk about the books as well as the next book, which is hopefully going to be coming out in October of 2023. That book will follow Kai and his son, so single dad romance. It's not a spoiler because it was hinted at already in book 2, but outside of that, all we know is that he is a baseball player, he's a single dad, and the mother is out of the picture. So we are hopefully going to get that in October, but I'll try to be patient, and worst comes to worst, I'm just going to listen to the playlist on repeat and maybe even reread these books. These are also stunning covers. I have yet to get my hands on the physical copies. To be honest, I'm trying to be really patient about independent books now. I just really want my books to match. And there's the alternate covers and the male model covers. I am leaning more towards the male model covers, but if they end up all staying independent published, or maybe if it gets traditionally published, I wouldn't be surprised. I'll certainly pick up the discrete covers as well, but my preference would be the male model covers, just for the sake of representation, and the models are stunning. I mean, the skyline is beautiful too, but the models are stunning. So yeah, I look forward to book 3 again. Hopefully it will come out around October the 10th. Liz Tomforde did explain in the video why that is the date that she's shooting for. We are also aware of who the male main character will be in book 4. That will be Rio. He is another hockey player that was featured in book 1 and 2 of the Windy City series. He is very goofy and younger compared to the other main characters of the other books, but still very good friends. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to his book as well. Um, Outside of that, this series I feel like has definitely the potential to blow up even more. I hope that for this author, because again, I'm not only connected to the writing style, but the humor, the banter, the representation. I'm just so happy that I was able to come across this author, and I'm grateful that it was mentioned on Caitlin's channel. So she did a very good job as well hosting the interview, but definitely check out her channel. And those are all the book recommendations that I have for Galentine's Day. Again, Galentine's Day is considered the day before Valentine's Day. I noticed this has been more of a platonic celebration of friendships and close sibling relationships. So these are just all the books that I feel have that element within their series. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any recommendations yourself, or if you've enjoyed any of these. So I'd be happy to chat about them and more in depth. But definitely add these to your TBR if you haven't read them. Again, my name's Alexis. Take care and happy reading.